Alrighty, so this is going to be a general guide on how to play the current Staff Mirage. Now, before I start this video, I do want to make a disclaimer saying that uh, Staff Mirage just came out a couple of days ago. It's extremely powerful right now. Dare I say it, broken or overpowered, and I fully expect there to be nerfs in the future. So keep in mind that all the info that I'm giving is not only very new, but could potentially be completely inaccurate in the near future because we may need to change things such as our builds and such. But going into it, this is going to be for what is currently available for Staff Mirage as of this newest May 11th patch. And we'll just go ahead and jump right into it, getting right into our gear and such. If you already have an Axe Mirage, then you're pretty much 90% of the way there. There's very little difference right now between Axe Mirage and Staff Mirage in terms of build, and this will still guarantee that you can give full uptime on Alac and Might. You do not need to spec Boon Duration. So we can just use our Axe Mirage set if you have one. If not, you are going to need full Vipers all the way down. All your trinkets, all your weapons, all your gear. You're going to put Nightmare Runes on your armor, which you do for Axe Mirage already. And then the small differences you're going to have is you're going to be taking Staff with Energy, which is the same as Axe, who put Energy on both sets. But instead of Malice, because Axe Mirage doesn't cap out on Condi Duration, we're going to be putting Bursting, because we can cap out on Condi Duration in this build. So you put Bursting on both staffs, Energy on both staffs, and you're good to go. You can see I'm at 93 and a half right now. That's without food. If I do go ahead and pop food, I can get right up to that crisp clean 100. That's because of one of the chaos traits that I'll be going into later that gives us an absolute ton of Condi Duration as well as some Boon Duration. And I do need to put a couple of infusions in to get to that clean 100. You need 8 expertise infusions, which you can see slotted into my armor. I have all these expertise infusions, and I also have it in my weapons. If you do not have expertise infusions, you could potentially keep Malice Sigils instead of Bursting, and then swap out your neck for Sinister, and that'll get you to like 99.6% Condi Duration, which is still pretty much perfect. But infusions are definitely the way to go. If you plan on doing infusions soon, you can just slot Bursting for now and infuse them as you go till you get to that clean 100. And then you can fill in the rest with Condi damage if you want. If you have the money, if you have the means, just throw those in there. I haven't even upgraded my rings, so I'm still missing some as well. So that being said, the build is pretty simple, especially if you have any experience with Axe Mirage. And we can go ahead and shift into the trait lines. So the big difference between any other past Mirage play is we're going to be taking Chaos. Chaos was buffed a ton on the May 11th patch, to the point where you might actually see it on Axe Mirage as well, because it's so dang strong right now. So the first trait is pretty much irrelevant. We get regen if we get hit below 75% HP. Whoop-de-doo. Most of the time our healers are giving us regen anyway, so relatively irrelevant. The second one is pretty minor when we heal, and this is going to be every other heal because the internal cooldown is 28 seconds, while our heal is 25 seconds. But when we heal, we cast a Lesser Storm of Chaos as well, Lesser Chaos Storm, which is not really a big deal. It's a tiny bit of damage. It does a daze, and it does the chance to put poison on the target. If it doesn't put poison, the damage is going to be pretty much irrelevant. Maybe you get some Aegis and Resolution and Swiftness, but you're probably having Swiftness anyway. This is a pretty minor trait. This is a pretty big one. The next 3 traits are pretty extensive for this class. This one gives us a straight up 10% boost. End of story, as long as you have regen on you. As well as taking 10% less Condi damage, which is a nice little side boost. Our Chaotic Potency is giving us 240 condition damage, as long as we're wielding a staff, as well as reducing those staff recharges by 20%. That's huge. That's a lot of free stat right there. And then to tack on to the free stat, as long as we have regen, we also have 250 concentration and expertise. This is 16.66% duration on both our Condi Duration and our Boon Duration, which is why we can hit that crisp clean 100 when Axe Mirage could not before. It's a huge amount of duration, and whether we keep this or not, we'll see in the future. But for now, it makes life very easy. We get that 16.6% to boon duration as well, which makes it easier to keep up a lack as well. You don't actually need that 16% to keep up a lack, but that definitely makes it a ton easier. So keep that in mind. And then last but not least, there's a little bit of debate whether choosing chaotic interruption or bountiful disillusion. If you don't have a guaranteed source of vigor, bountiful disillusion is definitely a very good choice. You still have other sources of vigor when it comes to shattering, but you're only going to be doing one shatter, so this is pretty minor. And when it comes to critting on your critical infusion from the other trees. So this gives 50% uptime by itself, a little bit more since you have that free boon duration, but it's still not enough with the shatters, and with that you're not going to have full-time vigor. So I think this does a good job of getting you the rest of the way. But if you know that you have a vigor source in your comp, you can go ahead and switch this to chaotic interruption. Many times staff 4 is going to be the only ability you have on cooldown, and you can go ahead and just hopefully get some cooldown reduction anytime you're doing a CC, which obviously comes from your heal, like we mentioned earlier. Getting this free days, that's going to be the most common source. And then if you are CCing the boss between obviously using Chaos Storm or anything else you're CCing during a break bar, you might get some reduction on that 4 as well. If you get reduction on 2 or 3, it's not really super helpful. They're not a lot of damage. I'll go into those more later, but that makes this trait pretty small overall, unfortunately. But it would be a little bit of free damage if it does manage to proc on your 4. Moving on to dueling, there's a little bit of debate on whether dueling or illusion is the best tree. From my experience, I'm definitely going to be saying dueling is the better tree, and I'll explain a little bit why. As of now, it just offers way too much compared to illusion. So going into it, obviously I said earlier, we get 50% vigor, a little bit more because of our boon duration. And then that's every time we crit, right, on a 10-second cooldown, so that comes up pretty often. Phantasmal Fury, this is a big one because it combos with our next trait, gives our Phantasms 20% crit chance, permanent Fury. Anytime our illusions crit, they get to bleed. This is pretty huge on the dueling tree. Between the free Fury and your own, since you're going full Viper, you have a crap ton of crit chance yourself. 55% crit chance, that means that every other attack your illusions are doing is applying bleed because of this trait here. In benches I've seen, this keeps upwards of 30 plus bleed stacks on the boss. That is a ton of free damage simply by having a trait and auto attacking, or having clones, letting your clones auto attack. It's pretty intense. Moving on, we're going to take Bleeding Dissipation. This makes it so our Shatter 2 blinds, and this is going to sync with our other trait, which I'll explain in a sec. Master Fencer, this gives us Fury, which is cool, but realistically we should have Fury anyway, so this is not a super important trait, but it is nice to have. And Ineptitude. Ineptitude causes confusion whenever you cause blind, which, like I said, Shatter 2 is now blinding, which means this is going to add a ton of confusion to Shatter 2, which is going to be our main Shatter, and it also adds confusion to Staff 4, which also has blind and confusion on it by default. So this helps a ton with free confusion. It's just a lot of confusion, it's a lot of bleeding. Dueling has a ton of damage built into it, and I definitely suggest it. Some people, like I said, think illusion is kind of better. I have my own reservations on that, and I don't think that it is, mainly because of this, which will make it so that shatters inflict torment. This brings into effect the need to double shatter to really justify this. You'll have 2 charges of F1, which is pretty minor because it's a power skill, and this is a condition class. But that links in with the double shattering for torment, really. This last tree gives your phantasms a little bit more power, which isn't a big deal because, again, we're a Condi class and they're doing power damage for the most part, unless they're auto-attacking, but phantasms don't auto-attack, so that doesn't help us, right? And then we get reduced recharge on Shatter, which is going to be our F2, right? And then we also get some free damage with this attack, compounding power. So it does have some benefits, don't get me wrong. It's definitely useful in its own way, but I don't think it's going to be stronger than dueling, especially on confusion fights. But even if it's not a confusion fights, this 30 stack of bleeding is pretty crazy. So overall, I'm going to be sticking to dueling. That's what I've done so far, and it's definitely served me well. And then finally, of course, Mirage for the final tree, since we are playing Mirage. This first trait lets us use axes, big deal, we don't care. But more importantly, it lets us use Mirage Cloak so that we can ambush skill, which is going to be our 1. Whenever we have Mirage Cloak and we press 1, it turns into an ambush skill. That's going to be our main source of alacrity and might, and is going to be a huge source of our damage as well. So this is a huge button to be pressing all the time. You can see that Chaos Vortex ambush. We can do that every time we get a Mirage Cloak, which is from this trait, which we get by dodging, and we get by picking up mirrors. So that's huge. This is a very, very important trait, and the reason why we're so strong. Self-deception, this is going to be our main source of clone generation. This makes it so that as long as we have a clone on the field already, our deception skills, of which we have 3, also spawn clones. So that means that we have a very guaranteed way of getting back up to 3 clones very quickly, which is incredibly important for Mirage. If I've taught you nothing, be at 3 clones. That is the most important thing about Mirage, whether you're playing Axe Mirage, whether you're playing Staff Mirage. You need to be making sure you're at 3 clones. This is a very vital trait to being able to do that consistently. There is some debate on whether you could swap this down to Renewing Oasis to guarantee some more regeneration if you feel sketchy about that, and then you would have to generate clones through Staff 3, which normally we will not be using. If you feel like your regen is really at possible chance to not be attained because you're with a heal run, God forbid, which shouldn't happen because now you're a lack, or for whatever reason, you know, you're with a druid that's solo healing and has heal springs and you can't guarantee that you're getting regen, this might be a good choice. This gives you regen every time you gain Mirage Cloak, which you're going to be doing like crazy, so it pretty much guarantees regen uptime, but it does get rid of your best way of generating clones without nuking your own DPS, because Staff 3 is not a DPS gain, and I'll go into that more a little bit later, but that is an option if you can't guarantee your regen uptime. Nomad's Endurance, this will make sure that we get a little bit of extra vigor, like I mentioned earlier. Since we're only doing F2 Shatter, this has relatively small value, but it does of course give us that 150 Condi damage, which is definitely very nice. We should have vigor up all the time, so that is a lot of free Condi damage. And then if you play Axe Mirage, you might have been used to taking Mirror Axes. Since we're not using axes, we don't need this. We're not going to be needing protection because hopefully our healer is giving us that. So we're going to go ahead and go with Desert Distortion. Now, depending on how you're playing Mirage, this may have very little value. This makes it so that your F4 will make you ambush, and it will make it so each clone that is detonated by F4 Shatter becomes a mirror. So you're essentially getting 4 ambushes out of a single F4 Shatter. Single 3 clone F4 Shatter, which is a ton of ambushes, that is a ton of a lack, and potentially a ton of damage, but you might not be pressing this, and I'll talk about that a little bit more later. But it is something to consider, especially if you are the only source of a lack. But really there's no other good trait to take unless you want some protection, I guess, so that's what we're going to take anyways. Moving on. Speed of Sand, every time we Mirage Cloak we get 66% movement speed. That's a huge boost of speed, very nice for trying to get away from dangerous things like SH walls. Since we will be Mirage Cloaking so much, we get that every time we dodge, we get that every time we pick up a mirror. It's a lot of free movement speed. And last but not least, Infinite Horizons. This is a ridiculously OP trait. You will never not take this in PvE. Maybe you take these in PvP sometime, but this is just so much damage that there's no reason you would ever not take it. It makes it so that when you ambush, your clones ambush as well, because they will be getting Mirage Cloak with you. And that is huge. That's a lot of free damage. So always take Infinite Horizon. So that's it for the traits. Just so I can go over it quickly, Chaos will be 1, 3, and I am choosing 3, 1, 3, 3, but some people will be doing 1, 3, 1. You'll definitely see that as well. Dueling will always be 1, 1, 2, and Mirage will almost always be 1, 1, 1. If you cannot guarantee regen uptime, you might take 2, 1, 1. But then you're going to have to use staff 3 to generate clones, which is a feels bad. So 1, 1, 1 should be the prey. If you're in a group that has regen, please tell your commander to put you in the regen group, regen sub, and you'll be good to go. So moving on to the abilities themselves. This is obviously where the big play comes in for how ridiculously strong this class is right now. Chaos, Vortex. Our auto attack is Winds of Chaos, which you can see on top there. It shoots out a little bouncing orb that will give Torment to the boss. It'll bounce back to an ally and give them Fury and Might, and then it'll bounce back to the boss and give them more confusion. So that's already a lot of damage. But more importantly, every time you ambush, you do Torment, Confusion, and Bleeding. That's a lot. Between your clones and yourself, that is, like I said earlier, 30 plus stacks of Bleeding on the boss, as well as a ridiculous amount of Torment and Confusion. Upwards of 40 to 50 stacks depending on where you are in your rotation. It's a ridiculously large amount of Torment and Confusion, and it is a huge portion of why this class does so much damage on fights like Soulless Horror and Largos and other very, very high confusion powerful fights. Moving on to number 2, we have Phase Retreat. This is our main source of 0 clone generation. Because like I said, if you're at 0 clones, these guys will not give you clones. Deception skills do not. So if we are at 0 clones and we need to get back to 3, this is our main button. We'll be pressing Staff 2 to get that instant clone. Staff 3 summons 2 phantasms who will do power damage and apply vulnerability. So I think there are circumstances where if you are stacking Mirages and you have no guaranteed source of vulnerability, you guys will most likely be pressing this button. But if you have a guaranteed source of vuln, like some Firebrands, or a Hollow, or a Dragon Hunter, or anything like that, you should never be pressing this button. If Storm on Druid, anything like that, you know, if you have guaranteed source of vuln, never press this button. It's power damage. It doesn't help us that much. You will press this during your opener, which I'll go into more later, and then for the rest of your rotation, you simply ignore it. Out of maybe one specific circumstance, which I will talk about as well later. Chaos Armor. This is an instant cast ability that applies confusion and blindness, and since it blinds, we have Ineptitude, which gives it even more confusion. This is free damage. It's an instant cast. It doesn't interrupt anything you're doing. Press it on cooldown all of the time. Anytime you see this button pressable, just press it. It's free. There's no reason not to. Just do it. You also have the chance for some random, boons and potentially applying more random stuff to the boss if it attacks you. But for the most part, it's free damage. Just press it. And then finally, Chaos Storm. This has the chance to give us random boons and potentially random poison to the boss. And it does a little bit of power damage, but overall it's useless from a damage perspective. It is not strong enough to press. Don't press it. It does have that daze though, so if you are on a break bar, you should definitely drop this on the boss. Outside of CC, this is a useless button. This is a CC button, end of story. So we're only pressing Staff 5 if we need to break bar. Besides that, you're going to completely ignore that. Moving on, if you played Axe Mirage, you're probably if you play any other Mesmer, you're probably very used to taking Signet of the Ether. Signet of the Ether makes it so that you can cast your Phantasm twice in a row, basically. It resets the cooldown of any Phantasm skills, but like I said earlier, since this is a power Phantasm, it doesn't do a lot of damage for us. We don't press this button if we don't have to, so there is no reason for us to take Signet of Ether. So, what do we replace it with? In this lovely circumstance, we are going to take False Oasis. Since False Oasis is a deception skill, it will give us clone generation, and it also drops a mirror when it's done with its Oasis, which is another ambush, because as long as we pick up these mirrors and run into them, there it is, we get another free ambush. And ambushes are completely, vitally important to this build, so the more ambushes, the better. This is a great skill. It also gives us vigor, which I talked about earlier. This, between your trait I'm sorry, between your chaos trait, your dueling trait, your shatter trait, and your heal, you're pretty much guaranteeing yourself full vigor uptime. So very nice ability. Definitely something you're going to want to keep around. Signet of Domination and Signet of Midnight, these both come from Axe Mirage. This gives us more damage as well as a emergency CC if we need to use it. And Signet of Midnight is incredibly important to our Condi duration since it gives us 12% Condi duration, aka 180 expertise. This does blind and apply confusion on activation, but losing 12% Condi duration is not worth it. So this is a button we will never press. Never press Signet of Midnight. It is a straight up DPS loss. The only time you ever want to press this is if you need to break CC, if you get bubbled on Largos, something like that. If you really need to free yourself, you can press this button. Outside of that, never press it. It's not worth the confusion. Don't do it. You can sometimes press Signet of Domination if you need to CC, if you need to help with a break bar. It's better to lose 180 condition damage than to wipe, right? I would hope that most people agree with that. So if you feel like that break bar isn't going to break, don't be greedy. Press Signet of Domination. That's 300 break bar damage. That's a good chunk for an instant, almost instant cast. It's a lot of damage. Don't be greedy. If you don't have to, you don't need to press it. You know, if you have a bunch of renegades with stab 5, your druid, anything else with big CC, you know, mace, warrior, then it's not a big deal. Keep it up for the free damage, but don't kill your group because you don't want to stun the boss. And finally, Crystal Sands. This is also from Axe Mirage. This drops a little targeted projectile that you can see there. I'm going to go ahead and turn off Snap to Ground so you can see it. Each one of those arrows is a projectile, so you need to try and make sure that you get it in the boss's hitbox, right? Since this is a huge hitbox, I can land it anywhere here, and I will make sure that they all hit it. But if I put it right here, only one is hitting the boss, right? If I put it here, I got 2 hitting the boss. If I put it here, I got 3. You want all 6 hitting the boss. You want to make sure to hit the boss with all of these, which is a lot more important on smaller bosses where you may just miss a chunk of what they're doing, right? So if I could do my best to center that and drop it, it also does leave a mirror, so you need to put someplace where you're going to be able to grab it if you're trying to be, because that's another ambush, right? So if you're trying to be sneaky and Largos is dashing all over the place and you try and charge it into his dash, and now he's all the way the heck over there and your mirror's all the way over there, and then he dashes over here and your mirror's over there but the boss is over here, you're wasting an ambush. So make sure this is somewhere where you can pick it up. The closer to you the better, of course, but you definitely want that mirror in an easy access location so that you can grab it for another ambush. It also applies confusion per hit and damage per hit, so definitely a lot of power on this, a lot of damage. This is a very good button that we're always going to have. And last but not least, Jaunt. This is our elite skill. There might be some debate in taking like MOA or Bass Invis for certain speed strats, but outside of that, you're always going to be using Jaunt. It does confusion to the boss when you hit them. Since it's a deception, it is another source of clone generation, a very good source of clone generation since it has 3 charges. And it's of course free mobility. I have used this to jump over soulless horror walls so that I could keep hitting them and not die, different things like that. It can definitely be good for saving your life. So keep that in mind. It's a very useful skill in a lot of different ways. And then our shatters. F1 is mainly a power shatter, so we don't use it. F2 is a ton of confusion, and now that we make it blind because of our trait, we do even more confusion. And it also gives us vigor if you're taking chaos 3 at the end there, right? So there's a ton to this. There's a ton of vigor, there's a ton of confusion. This is what we're using off cooldown as much as we can. F3 is a lot of days. It will do 100 break bar damage per clone, including yourself, so that's 400 break bar damage. That is a very good chunk. Feel free to use that if you need to break CC bars, but again, like I mentioned earlier, make sure you get yourself back up to 3 clones very quickly. The sooner you get up to 3 clones, the better. And then last but not least, F4, which makes us distort. It makes us invincible for up to 4 seconds if you have 3 clones, which is huge, as well as giving us regen and vigor. And like I mentioned earlier, with this trait, it will also make you ambush instantly, and each clone that is shattered will also give you a lovely mirror, which, since I have 3 clones, boom, you see, oh, look at all those mirrors. Actually, that was clever. I'm not sure how I did that, but I got 4 mirrors. Oh no, that was my sands. Ignore me, I'm being dumb. These 3 mirrors are coming from my F4. That is a lot of free ambush. The problem with F4 is that clones can be very RNG, right? These guys decided to spawn in a good location, but they are extremely close together. Actually, they're on top of each other now because that clone decided to move on top of that guy, right? So when I F4 shatter these, there's a good chance that these mirrors are stacked. As well as if I have like a clone over here, right? And I'm over here with the stack. So I press F4. These 2 mirrors are on top of each other. Maybe I can get one. Yep. But that other one is so far away that I can't really use it. Just don't get that. There's really no point unless you're a pure DPS. If you're trying to give a lack to your team, you're going to miss them. That's so far away, right? So there is some RNG to be had with F4 that you do need to take into consideration. But keep in mind that is 4 ambushes, and I'll talk a little bit more about that here in a sec. So that's the basis of the build. That's the basis of our traits and what our abilities do. Now we have to put it all together, right? How do we play Staff Mirage? So the main source of how your gameplay will be depends on whether you are concentrating on providing a lack or if you are concentrating on doing DPS, because this is very good at both right now. If you are doing DPS, we'll start with that one. Things get pretty simple. The opener is going to be the same for both a lack and DPS, with like a single minor variation that I choose to do personally. If you are doing DPS, your opener is going to be Staff 3 into Staff 2, into Sands, into Jaunt. That will give us 3 clones instantly. Then we can do, we can pick up our Sands to do an ambush, since we have some time, and then we can do an F2. And then we can have our phantasms that we spawned turn into clones, and we can do a false oasis. And then from there, we'll go ahead on with our regular rotational properties that Mirage deals with, which is just management, resource management for the most part. 4 should always be used. 4 is also in the opener, but 4 is literally just used on cooldown. So it's not actually part of the opener, it's just use it all the time. So I didn't really mention that, but you should definitely press that in the beginning as well. So just to show it in slow motion, right, I press 3, I press 2, I have my Sands, I have my Jaunt, I do that ambush, I F2, they turn into clones, I Oasis, and my 4 should have been used a while ago. Oasis gives me another mirror, so I can throw that out after doing a dodge, right? But that's basically how that works. If I speed that up, I will have time for another ambush in between when the phantasms turn into clones. The window is a little bit tighter, but I can show it here real quick, right? So if I do all of that in quick succession, I do 3, I do 2, I jaunt, do that. I accidentally messed that up, so we're going to try that again. I do 3, I do 2, I mirror, I do that, I get that ambush, I do another ambush, I can F2, and then I can false oasis. I didn't do it quite quick enough, right? It's a very tight window, and it's something you'll need to practice. But if you do have the time to get 2 ambushes in before your phantasms change, and that's the ultimate goal. If you don't feel safe with that, just do the mirror ambush for now. But 3, 2, that ambush, F2. I just missed it again, so it's definitely something that takes practice to get consistently, and I'm not getting it right now, but it is possible. If you want to be safe though, which I definitely suggest while you're first learning, just do that single ambush. Don't worry about the second ambush, and go ahead and F2, which I can do at a very leisurely pace here, right? And then I can ambush, F2. I'm waiting, there they go, and now I can do that one. It's a very, very big window there if you're only doing a single ambush, but that's the basis of that opener. That is basically the only time you will ever be using Staff 3. The rest of the time, to get that very, very powerful 3-clone F2, right, in the very beginning, as well as getting yourself back up to 3 clones instantly. Past that, we don't need Staff 3 to get back up to 3 clones, because we're only doing F2. So we're using this as a way to get our very first F2 out very quickly, as well as not getting ourselves at a single clone. So after the opener, when I've pressed all these fancy buttons, I've done my ambush, they turned into things, I put that down, I did another ambush, I got my mirror, I did another ambush. From here on out, you do not press staff 2 unless you need a clone, right? Because it doesn't do any damage, it's just movement. So we simply leave it up, we leave this up, and when we have F2, we can F2, we can staff 2, we can false oasis, and we can jaunt. You actually need to do the jaunt first, otherwise the false oasis is going to be left in Narnia. So I said that a little bit incorrectly. But just to reiterate, you do the 2, F2, 2, jaunt, false oasis. Since false oasis has the same cooldown as F2, these guys are in sync. It's a very nice use the entire time. You're always going to want to save at least one charge of jaunt for this combo to make your life simpler. But it's pretty much that simple. We F2. When that comes off cooldown, we F2 instantly, staff 2, jaunt, oasis. I'm doing this very slowly, so like obviously my F2 and my oasis are getting a little bit out of sync there, for the simply so that you can actually see what I'm doing. But if you do that quickly, these guys will stay very nicely in sync, and you can always use your F2 with your false oasis, and it's a very, very nice combo, and it really simplifies the rotation a lot. So just to speed it up there, I do that, and I'm good to go. Now they're, what, 2 seconds away from each other, which will be the same as when I do it again, right? So that's very, very useful for the combo. I'm still kind of building this muscle memory myself. If you've played an Axe Mirage in the past, you're probably used to syncing Crystal Sands with F2, and because, remember, if we take illusions, which is what Axe Mirage used to take, and we have this, our Shatter F2 is now down to 21 seconds, while our Sands is 20 seconds. So there's a 1 second difference between them, even less with Alacrity. So most Axe Mirage players are probably very used to syncing F2 with Sands. But if you're playing Staff Mirage, you will not have illusions, which means that you lost that Shatter cooldown from illusions. And you're now at 25 seconds for your F2. So it syncs up very well with your false oasis. And that frees up Sands so that we can use Sands on cooldown, which is a lot of free confusion. It's that extra mirror. It's going to be a lot more damage in the end to be able to do it that way, without worrying about Crystal Sands desyncing ridiculously from F2. Let me spawn the Golem again, get him back in here. And last but not least would be your dodges, right? As a Mirage, dodges are an incredibly important aspect, whether you're playing Axe or DPS. You're never going to want to overcap endurance, right? So anytime you see endurance about to be full, you need to do a dodge and get that ambush out. As well as weapon swapping on cooldown. And since we have 2 staffs with energy, we get 50% of our endurance back every time we dodge, right? So that means we're going to get half this bar back. So we don't let that fill up, right? But we also don't weapon swap when this is over half. So if you see that you're going to be able to weapon swap and you're over half, you need to do one more ambush and then weapon swap so you don't waste that extra endurance. Anytime you waste endurance, you're wasting ambushes, which is wasting might, wasting a lack, wasting damage. You're wasting a lot of resources anytime you let endurance overcap. So your most important resource while you are playing Staff Mirage will definitely be your endurance. Your endurance and using your F2. And since we have a simple F2 combo, right? F2, Staff 2, Jaunt, Oasis. F2, Staff 2, Jaunt, Oasis. Building that muscle memory is a very important part of playing this, and as well as managing your resource, which is endurance in this particular case. So if you can get the hang of doing your F2 muscle memory, and if you can get the hang of taking care of your dodge resource, you're already 90% of the way there to be able to play a DPS Staff Mirage. So not letting that overcap is extremely vital. So just to recap, anytime you see that I'm about to be full, you better do an ambush. If you're about to weapon swap, the sucker better be under half because you're about to get half that bar back. So that's a very important part of how you ambush. And last but not least, for the last 10% of the class, it's spamming 4 and spamming Crystal Sands. These guys are used on cooldown, as well as not letting Jaunt get to 3 stacks. You only need to save 1 for your F2, right? So any other time that this is about to hit 3 stacks, you need to use 1 to make sure that you're not overcapping free Jaunts. So using 4, using Sands, and making sure Jaunt doesn't hit 3. That is the last 10% of DPS staff. So it's a relatively simple class. Outside of learning the opener, outside of building your F2, Staff 2, Jaunt, Oasis, and outside of managing dodge, you're done. Those are the 3 things you need to master. And then you're good to go to play staff on a very, very decent level. It's a very strong class for how overall simple it is to play. Now, that being said, that's it for DPS Mirage, Staff Mirage. If you are taking care of if you are the only Staff Mirage in your group, that means you are probably taking care of Alacrity. If there's more than one Staff Mirage in the group, you do not have to worry about it. Both of you simply doing your DPS will cause Alac to be at full uptime because you are both giving 10 man Alac. So if there is a single Staff DPS with you, don't worry about everything I'm going to say from here on out. Just play regular DPS Staff Mirage and you're good to go. If you are playing Alac Staff Mirage, or if you are the primary Alac person, I like to start my opener with an ambush, simply to get that first tick of Alacrity out to my group, as well as getting some might. Your other Mirages will probably starting with the opener I showed, Staff 3, 2, but they don't ambush until a couple of buttons in, right? So the rest of the group does not have Alacrity. So you're going to be doing the same opener, except you're starting with an ambush, and then you go into 3, 2, dodge, dodge, you know, all that lovely nonsense that we were talking about earlier. If you don't start off with that ambush right in the very beginning, your group's not getting a lag. And if your whole group doesn't have a lag, that's probably a bigger damage loss than you getting your opener perfectly, instead of wanting to use an ambush with 0 clones. So, at least one Staff Mirage needs to be in charge of doing that first ambush if you guys are in a multiple Staff Mirage group, or if you are the solo Staff Mirage, you need to do that first ambush before your opener. Besides that, since we have 0 boon duration outside of the Chaos Tree, you can keep a lack with everything I've said up till now. You can keep a lack if you play DPS Staff Mirage perfectly, but it is very tight. You need to make sure that you are pressing all of your buttons on cooldown and managing your resources perfectly. There's not enough of a safety window to be able to mess up at all, or if a mechanic pushes you from group or something like that, you are going to drop a lag. So how do we solve this without taking more boon duration? We can introduce F4 into our rotation, right? So assuming we did our opener already and we have all of this out, and now we're waiting on our other cooldowns to come back up. We have cooldowns here, right? How do we get back to 3 clones while using F4? This is the one other time that I use Staff 3. Since I don't have Crystal Sands up right now to be able to use that in combo with Jaunt, I use Staff 3. So with everything on cooldown, I will Staff 3. And as soon as I see these clones about to, or these phantasms about to shift, I'll ambush, and then I'll do another Jaunt. They shift into clones right away. I just had another ambush because of my F4, right? And I have 3 mirrors to pick up, and I just spam these ambushes. And this is a ton of Alacrity. You just did 4 ambushes back to back. That's 12 seconds of extra Alacrity. With how long it took to take each cast, you now have a buffer of 8 seconds Alacrity that you did not have before that F4. So that is something that, again, in practice you don't technically need to do, because you do sustain a lack without using F4, but that is a safety net that I very, very much suggest if you are the only Alac provider. If you are the only Staff Mirage in the group, if there's no Condi RRs, if there's no Renegade with 10 man Alac, I definitely suggest introducing your F4 into your rotation, which you are going to do the next time your Staff 3 comes up, right? So that will probably make you overcap on endurance because there's so many mirrors, but that also means you can spam some dodges after anyway, right? So now your Alacrity is probably looking like 15 seconds on everybody because you managed to throw in that F4. That is a very, very nice safety net to not have to worry about mechanics pushing you from the group, or you messing up your rotation at all, you now have that nice 15-second safety net, and you're good to go for the rest of the fight, assuming nothing goes absolutely insane. If something goes insane later on, then you can probably do the same thing. Just introduce one more F4 with your staff 3 into the rotation, and you'll be good to go. But that is the only time I really hard suggest using F4. Overall, it's probably going to be a damage loss because you have to use staff 3. Because you have to run around and figure out where your mirrors are. If you play it perfectly, there's probably some thought behind it being a DPS gain simply because it's so many more ambushes. But it's very difficult to play perfectly. There's a lot of RNG on where they're shattering around the boss, right? Losing them in the middle of the fight because you have 17 other staff barrages dropping mirrors all over the place. There can be a lot of things that make that difficult to use. I think it has the potential to be a DPS gain, but most of the time it's probably going to be a loss. But a little bit of loss on yourself is always less important than making sure everyone in your party has Alacrity. So I definitely suggest that if you're the sole Alacrity provider. And I do it myself if I'm the sole Alacrity provider. A couple of things I want to note before we move on and go ahead and put an end to this video, because that is the basis of everything that you have to worry about. There are some minor details. One thing, this ambush that you're using to provide the alac does not come out until the entire cast bar is done, right? And it is a very long cast. It's a 1-second cast without quickness, which is a long cast. With quickness, you're looking at like what, 0.6 seconds or something like that, 0.8 seconds. And it is incredibly easy to interrupt with anything that's not instant. Our instants are our F2, our 4, and our jaunt. If you're using anything besides 4 and jaunt and F2, you can interrupt that cast. With a Sands, with a 2, with a weapon swap. I just did 3 ambushes, and none of them gave Alacrity, none of them gave might, none of them did damage. So it is incredibly easy to interrupt your ambush, and it is something that you have to be very conscious of while you're learning this class and while you continue to play it, especially if you are the Alacrity giver. Because if you're doing 3 ambushes without giving any alac, there's no way you're going to make that up. You're probably going to have 10 seconds of downtime on alac between your entire group. It's very important that you manage to finish that ambush. Wait for the entire cast bar to finish. One other thing to note, which you may be used to if you play Axe Barrage, is that your clones do not have quickness. They are attacking slower than you, which means that if you do 2 ambushes in a row, you have a very good chance of interrupting their very first ambush because you're doing it faster than them. It doesn't always happen, you know, it really depends on ping and how smooth everything is going, how fast you manage to press those. But if you ambush and then ambush again, I don't think he launched that first bolt. I interrupted his first bolt. You saw that he only launched 1 bolt. So you cannot do 2 ambushes back to back, like perfectly. Again, you're waiting for the cast bar to finish, but if you do it as soon as the cast bar finishes, you're going to interrupt his and you're going to lose damage. So make sure that you don't do that back. See that? He didn't launch that first ball. He only launched 1. I interrupted his first ball because he doesn't have quickness, but I do. So I just lost damage. He didn't drop that torment, confusion, and bleeding on the boss. I lost 3 stacks of damage. And that's huge, especially if you're ambushing a lot. So you need to ambush, you need to auto attack, you need to ambush. You gotta let him finish his cast as well. Otherwise you're just throwing DPS out the window. Not as vitally important if you're the alac giver, you know. If you need to emergency give people alac before you go do a mechanic, feel free to do 2 ambushes real quick, just to make sure that you don't lose alac. But it is a DPS loss, so keep that in mind. Try not to do 2 of those in a row so that you don't interrupt him. Beyond that, that's about the gist of how to play this class. You should be using Red-Lentil sobas. I think there is a cheaper option. I can't remember it off the top of my head. As well as toxic focusing crystals. If you want to be cheap, you can use tuning icicles. It is a minor loss, but it is a loss nonetheless. If you're being a tryhard, go ahead and get these toxic focusing crystals. These are like 20 silver versus tuning icicles being like 1 silver. So it's definitely a big price increase for a very minor gain. But if you're like me who has nothing else to spend his gold on, and you want to be a tryhard, go ahead and get these toxic focusing crystals. There is a cheaper version of the Red-Lentils. I can't think of it off the top of my head. I'll probably put it in the comment section below, or in the info description below, just so you guys can get that as well. So those are your go-to utilities and foods. You definitely want that expertise over Condi damage, so that you can make sure to hit that crisp clean 100, which I don't have right now because I don't have my food on. But if I did not have 100 expertise food, this would not turn into a 100. So expertise food is definitely very nice, and it's definitely what you're going to want to be going to into this build. And that's about the gist of it. I did do this kind of preemptive, and I do want to put a disclaimer again that this is very new, and there is a very good chance that this class gets nerfed. It's pretty ridiculous that this class can upkeep Might and Alac with 0 boon duration while doing an absolute ton of damage. So be prepared in the future to possibly have to change up your set to add boon duration if you want to play boon. I'm assuming if you want to play DPS Staff Mirage that this current set will not change unless they possibly nerf our Condi boon duration and Chaos Tree. Then we might have to add more expertise in through more infusions, or we might have to add a Malice Sigil, something like that, something to keep in mind for the future. This is still very, very new. This class came out 3 or 4 days ago, so keep that in mind. Besides that, I am Abyss Depth. I'm one of the instructors and trainers in RA, Raid Academy. So if you enjoyed this video and you want or have any interest in learning raids and such, there's a lot of great mentors and a lot of great instructors and stuff that can help you on your way to learning raids in Raid Academy. I'll go ahead and put the link for that in the description below as well. Let me know if there's anything else you want to know, or anything that I may have missed on Staff Mirage, because it is still very new and I'm sure there's things that people are still discovering. Feel free to throw that in the comments below, and you guys have a wonderful day. Hope you learned something, and I hope we see some more Staff Mirages out there in the future. You guys have a good day.